Welcome back to Wall of Gain, where passion meets music. And it's been a while since I recorded a video, been on a bit of a hiatus from YouTube, but I'm back now. And what better way to come back than to celebrate 15 years since the release of this album? It is, of course, Wasting Light by Foo Fighters. Hard to believe that this is 15 years old today, but it's true. I just saw it coming up on my feed and then it reminded me that I had this album and it was one of my favourite Foo Fighters albums. Okay, let's talk about this album and what I like and dislike about it. So it was released in 2011 and it marked a return to the band for Pat Smear. So if you notice on the album cover, Pat's face is prominent there in the album cover, and he had been he left the band after The Colour and the Shape, and then Chris Shiflett was brought in following There Was Nothing Left to Lose. So they were a four-piece band. Chris Shiflett was kind of the lead guitar player or whatever you would call it in the Foo Fighters. But when Foo Fighters started expanding their sound in sort of the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, they recorded an acoustic album, a live acoustic album, and they had to bring some extra musicians in, and Pat Smear came back into the fold at that point. He had recorded some of the live stuff with the band, and he had appeared on some of their other albums. So when this album was released, he was officially a member of the band back in the fold. So that meant the band had three guitar players, which is great for me as a guitar player because it meant there was plenty of textures, plenty of rhythms, and loads of interesting, intricate stuff that the guitar players were doing so that they weren't getting in each other's way, but also made this album sound really, really heavy and really, really rocky, and I really liked that. In terms of production, they had worked with some producers throughout the early 2000s, shall we say. Nick Raskulinecz, of course, Adam Kasper. But on this album, they decided to go back to Butch Vig, who Dave Grohl had worked with on Nevermind. And Butch Vig, one of my all-time favourite producers. I absolutely love his work with, of course, Nirvana. Also his work with Smashing Pumpkins. But I think he does an excellent job on this album. They went back to basics on this one. So they were recording on analog tape, which meant it was much harder to fix the songs afterwards. They weren't using Pro Tools, so they couldn't just copy and paste and snip files. It all had to be recorded on tape, and it all had to be physically cut with a razor blade, just like back in the 70s, 80s and early 90s. So that put a lot of restrictions on the band in terms of what they could do. They wanted this to feel like a live record. So basically that meant that they were recording everything in the studio and they weren't able to kind of use any studio trickery to make things sound better than it was. The band physically had to perform the songs. In terms of the location for this album, they actually decided to bring it back to basics and set up a makeshift studio in Dave Grohl's in his house in Los Angeles in the Valley. So that was where the album was recorded. It was very much a different vibe to other albums that they recorded in their own studio, Studio 606, or in any of the other big studios that they had worked in the past. I know they recorded some of the earlier albums in Virginia in Dave's basement, but this was in his Los Angeles home and essentially in his garage. So that's a bit of the background on the album. The making of this album is covered in a great documentary that was released shortly after the release of the album. And it's this here. It's called Back and Forth. And it basically chronicles, it's a documentary about the band, so it chronicles the whole band forming, how they formed, members coming and going, and then their current lineup. And then it went through the whole Wembley gig that they played with Led Zeppelin, members of Led Zeppelin coming on stage, Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones. That was excellent. And then it comes into the second half of the documentary is about the making of this record. And I think it's fantastic. I love when bands bring the camera into the studio. Now it's probably very commonplace with social media and how easy it is to access a camera. All you have to do is stick your phone on in the corner and there you go. You can get pretty decent footage from the studio and then box it up at a later date. But what Foo Fighters did on this, they decided to bring the cameras into the studio, and to be honest, some of it's a bit cheesy, some of it is a bit kind of contrived, but I think it makes for a good movie and a good record catalogue of what they were doing at that time and where the band was at that time in their career. Metallica also did it famously for 2003's Saint Anger. That film, Some Kind of Monster, was released in 2004. That was great as well. I really, really like that movie. I've watched it several times, have it on DVD here. Some people don't like it. They think it's a bit cheesy as well. Some people don't like that album. I wouldn't be a big fan of Saint Anger, but I won't let that stand in the way of the documentary. I think the documentary is excellent. This documentary is excellent as well. But let's get back to the music on this album, Wasting Light by Foo Fighters. So, it starts off with a song called Bridge Burning, which is an absolute rocker straight out of the Traps. Taylor Hawkins is on fantastic form on this album the whole way through, but particularly on this song, he really comes out rocking, and it's great to hear. You've got the three guitars overlaid, as I was saying, so you've got Chris Shiflett, Dave Grohl, and Pat Smear all doing their own thing on the guitars. Chris Shiflett kind of the more high-end, nuanced, intricate guitars. Dave Grohl is the meat really of the songs, the riffs, the structures of the songs, and then Pat Smear is sort of coming in with kind of staccato riffs, so he's following the drums and the rhythm of the song a lot of time. It's muted chords, chugged chords, or just ringing out chords, giving that extra layer of texture to the album. But Bridge Burning is a prime example of where we see all three guitars coming together very, very well. Nate Mendel obviously on bass on this album, for most of it anyway. The next song then we go on to is Rope, which was my favourite song on the album when it was released. Used to play in a covers band, and we did try to play this song, but it's very, very tricky with the timing, with the delay and stuff like that. We never actually played it live, but we did play it in the studio a couple of times, jamming it out, and it was great fun. Great rocking song, Rope. Really love that one, and I was lucky to see Foo Fighters on this tour in 2011. They played the Oxygen Festival in Kildare in Ireland, and they played the majority of this album, and including Rope, and I managed to get into the pit for the gig, the Foo Fighters gig, and it was amazing. Absolutely brilliant show. But yeah, Rope's one of my favourite songs on the album. Then we get Dear Rosemary, which is a song which features Bob Mould on vocals. Now, Bob was a huge fan of, sorry, I should say Dave was a huge fan of Bob's work, his early work with some of his bands from the punk scene. And Bob's a great vocalist as well. So he provided backing vocals on this, and I think Bob and Dave's voice really blend well together on this track, Dear Rosemary. Absolutely love it. The third track on the album, and I think it really rocks. Track number 4 is called White Limo, and it's kind of a heavy punk stroke metal song, kind of in the vein of Motorhead, and then Dave has this crazy distorted vocal over it as well. It's pretty good. I liked it when it came out first, but I think it's gotten a bit old. It wouldn't be my favourite song on the album anymore. Then we move on to song number 5, Alandria. That's a great song, got a great groove and a great rhythm on it. I think it's one of the best songs on the album, very underrated. And they played it live around the time they were touring this album, but unfortunately it's kind of dropped out of the set list. It pops up every now and again, but it really is a great song. The next track is number 6, and it's called These Days. Now, this track was a huge hit at the time, and I have to admit, I was not a fan. This track and another track, which I'll mention later on, they were the two big hits on the album, and I wasn't a big fan of them, and I thought they were kind of, radio-friendly hits, maybe is what I'd call them. They probably were the songs that were put on the album, and they were like really written as a radio hit. And that's fair enough. You got to have hits on these albums. But I just felt they weren't fitting in with this album. Now, years later, I do actually appreciate these songs a lot more as like stadium rock anthems. So these days now, I've come around to like it a lot more. I haven't seen Foo Fighters play a few times and play this song a few times. I really have come around to liking this song. Back and Forth is the next song. This is, I suppose, the title track for the documentary. And it's got the line Wasting Light. It's a brilliant song, I have to say. It's an album track, but an underrated song nonetheless. The next one we get is A Matter of Time. Okay, we're definitely seeing some filler here on this one. It's well played, it's well produced, some nice harmonies in there, the vocal harmonies from Dave overdubs, but definitely not the strongest song on the album. Then we have Mr. Misery, which I actually like. I think that's a very melancholic song. Again, great work on the guitars on this one, and the drums sound amazing as well, but I think that's a hidden gem. on the album. The second last song, I Should Have Known, actually features former Nirvana bassist Chris Novoselic playing bass on this one. And you can see in the documentary, he comes into the studio to lay down that bass line. And it's a big moment because you've got Dave and Chris playing on a song together. And they both were in Nirvana, and Butch Vig is in the room as well recording. So yeah, a lot of the Nevermind people in the room at the same time, which is great. But I don't think it's the best song, and it's towards the end of the album, which is probably where it belongs. But yeah, didn't really do it for me. And then the song, or the album should I say, finishes off with the song Walk, which, like I mentioned earlier with These Days, I always had those two tracks as the two tracks that were like hits included on the album to kind of sell the album and make the album more appealing to the mainstream. It's turned out that has been exactly the case, because these are the two songs that are staples in their set list from this album. They pretty much always play. If they're playing a full 2.5 hour, 3 hour gig, you will always get those two songs, These Days and Walk, in their set list. And again, I've grown to like Walk. I didn't like it when it originally came out, but when I've seen it live a number of times, it has inspired me a bit more to get into the song. So that's the album overall. So obviously it's through the RCA label under Sony, so Dave has full creative control on this. Produced by Butch Vig, mixed by Alan Moulder, which I think is a very interesting part, because Butch Vig is great at production and he's great at recording. He's a great recording engineer. He's got his finger on the pulse, or his hands on the dials, should we say, when the band are recording, and he's good at miking up the different instruments and mic placement and all that good stuff. Production engineering, he's brilliant. He's great at guiding the band as well towards certain ideas or away from certain ideas, depending on whatever the case may be. He's also very easygoing, it seems, in the studio, so that's great for a band to feel comfortable with him. But he leaves the mixing to other people. So obviously, most famously, Nevermind is mixed by Andy Wallace, and this one here is mixed by Alan Moulder. And I think that's a good thing, because sometimes when a producer and the band are so heavily involved with recording the music and involved in the whole production and all the engineering around recording, it's better to give that to someone outside the group, maybe, to come in and do the mixing and put a different spin on it. And I know Rick Rubin, a lot of the time, what he'll do is he will get a number of different mixing engineers to do mixes, and he'll take them away and listen to them, and he'll ask the band to listen to them, and they'll pick the best one. And I think that is it's a great way to get an outside perspective on the songs, and maybe someone else hear things in a different way when they're not as embedded in the whole process from the start. So I think it was a wise move to get Alan Moulder to come in and mix this album. I think the booklet's really cool. As I said before, the cover there has Pat Smear's face, but it has the other 5 members' faces there as well, in that kind of a multicolored scale. But then in the background it's just a plain black cover, and you've got Foo Fighters nice and popping out there in red, wasting light, so there's no mistaking whose album it is. And as we go through the track, we get this kind of pixelated thing going on with each of the band members. So we've got a page for Dave, there's a page for Taylor, we've got a page for Chris here, we got a page for the whole band in the room jamming out, which is brilliant. And then we get a page for Nate and a page for Pat, who was the new addition to the band, or re-addition to the band. The last page then just has some of the song credits and production credits and band credits, which is really cool. And then the last page then has a section of one of the guitar players' pedal board, which again is very cool. So yeah, I really like this album. Probably my favorite Foo Fighters album, this one, along with Colour in the Shape, which is excellent as well. But yeah, this is definitely worth a spin. I just saw it popping up that it was 15 years old on my YouTube feed, and then it gave a link to the full live recording of this, live performance should I say, of this song from the 606 studio in 2011. And apparently that was released as a part of the DVD release, the movie release when it came out in cinema. And I remember going to see the broadcast of the documentary when that came out in the cinema, and then I can't remember now if that was tagged on to the end, the live performance, but in any case I went back and I found the live performance on YouTube, I think it was at the time, and I was blown away by the musicianship and the energy in the room when those 5 guys performed those songs. Absolutely brilliant. One thing I will say before I leave you, Rami Jaffe actually makes a lot of appearances on many of these songs, and he then becomes a full-time member in a few later albums further on in the tracks. So the Foo Fighters, or Dave, was building this group of musicians to, you know, expand the band sound and really become a stadium rock band, which they are today, no doubt. They're touring Europe in the summer. I'm hoping that they're going to put a Dublin date in. They were only in Dublin recently in the last few weeks, where they recorded on the Other Voices show, which was broadcast last Sunday. Still need to watch that. And they also appeared in the Academy for a one-off show. One of my mates was lucky enough to get a ticket to that show, and he said it was absolutely amazing. There was only like 500-600 people in the venue, and it was like a real club gig, and they played through all the hits. It was like 2.5-3 hours long. But look, that's enough about Foo Fighters. It's great to be back doing the videos. If you like the video, stick a like on it. If you could also subscribe. Let me know in the comments what your favourite Foo Fighters album is. Do you think this one is up there? It certainly is one of my favourite, if not my favourite. And I will talk to you on the next one. Bye for now.